Thank you, Mr. Larry Johnson, for agreeing to be on this podcast. It's really a pleasure to have you here.
Well, it's my pleasure, Simit. As we spoke a while back, I made my first trip to India in February, and I'll be coming back in October. And I've just really enjoyed getting to know the Indian people, and they have a bright future ahead of them.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Like after our last conversation, I ordered your book and it's absolutely amazing. And like a lot of things are really, it took me back to my kind of days when I was working with nonprofits, and I could kind of relate a lot of things that you have mentioned in your book. But I want to kind of start with talking about like how the social sector has kind of evolved in the last few years. Like in India, for instance, like since the CSR Act came into being, like there has been an absolute, this about how the sector has kind of evolved in terms of the resources, in terms of the number of personnel, the number of people who have kind of gotten into the sector. And I'm sure like it has been kind of similar like in the US as well. So maybe if you could talk a bit about like the overall social sector landscape like across the world and like vis-a-vis India.
Well, you said something that really cued me in. You said, my book took you back to when you were working in nonprofits, and you could relate to that. You see, one thing that I've said for a long time is that human nature is universal. Culture is different. People dress differently. They behave differently in different situations. But human nature is pretty much the same wherever you go. And I certainly felt that when I was in India. There are some principles that are operating when it comes to engendering philanthropy. We see it in this country. We also see it in India. And in terms of what's happening in India with the CSR legislation, you're seeing a lot more formalized philanthropy, and it's being driven through a corporate interest. But like this country, the bulk of the funds will still come from motivated individuals. And so in this country, we have a very well-developed nonprofit sector. We have a well-developed philanthropic sector. That being said, those in the wealth management space will still say to you that there is a great deal of untapped resource that's not engaged in any way that could be engaged if the givers, the philanthropists, and I use the word philanthropist for someone who gives 1 rupee as opposed to 10 crow, or whatever it is, if they were engaged properly, this money would be made available to them. And we see that in this country as well. And of course, the big difference is, do you see philanthropy or giving as a transaction, or do you see it as a relationship between those who give and those who receive? So we have a lot of so-called sophistication in this country. Some of it is useful, some of it's not, because it does go back to people. Sooner or later, it goes back there. And one thing that I hope happens in India as you grow your philanthropic sector, that you don't fall victim to the technology razzle-dazzle. We've sort of fallen into that. The CRM companies, the donor screening companies, they sort of encourage that because they're selling their stuff, obviously, and that's not a bad thing. But there's this misnomer that somehow technology will solve your fundraising problems. Well, it won't. All right. And so if I were going to say the thing that I see in this country that I would not like to see in India is too much of a reliance on these fairly sophisticated tools to do your fundraising, because they will aid it. They won't do it for you.
It's really interesting that you mentioned this because like I see, like when I look at organizations like in the US, in Canada, in the UK, you see that nonprofits have started like even raising funds through cryptocurrency, right? We are still far away from, getting to that stage, because here bulk of the organizations are still struggling to, do like fundraising even in the traditional way. So, I mean, I would love to kind of understand in terms of how fundraising has also sort of evolved in the last few years, like in sort of evolved economies, like in the US, for instance, or in Canada.
Well, we're seeing a lot more reliance on giving through electronic channels. And that would be the traditional email, but now we're even seeing texting as a way of giving. And I suspect from what I learned when I was in India that you'll probably skip the email phase and go right into texting. You in India have a better developed cellular network than we do in this country. And I think part of that is because you sort of skipped between landlines to cell. And that's probably been one of the big differences is the modes of things. But it goes back to the basics, though. Even though you're using a different channel, a different method of communicating, it's still communication between people. Crypto is just another asset. It's like real estate or other tangible assets or currency. It's just another asset. People give to something they understand. The channel in which they give it or the form in which they give it is quite secondary. So that's, I would say, electronic channeling, differences in communication. That's going to be the differences, is the mode of communication. But what you're saying eventually has to come down to another person.
Given your experience of, more than 2-3 decades, like of having worked with tons of, nonprofits, in terms of fundraising, what are the things that, according to you, have kind of typically work really well when it comes to fundraising for social impact organizations?
The key is understanding, and this is my principle one, donors are the drivers. They are the ones who are driving the philanthropic energy. They are the vector. And when you understand that piece of it, that they are really driving the train, you don't have to say, oh, woe is me, they don't believe in my cause, blah, blah, blah. Don't go down that road. Don't go down the pity route, okay? The self-serving pity route. And believe me, nonprofits are prone to do that because they think they're so well motivated. Well, I like to say to a nonprofit, you're going to have to get over yourself, right? Yes, you're doing good work. There's no one that would dispute that, but it's really not about you. All right. And that's something you have to remember, that you're really a facilitator in this enterprise, you see, and it is an enterprise. We have nonprofits here that you say they're a business, and they kind of go, ooh, well, yes, you are. You're just not distributing profits to stockholders. That's all. I mean, you're still doing a work, and you have to have revenue coming in the door. So the key is, if you get over yourself, and then you look at those who would support you, but they would support you for their reasons, not the organization's reasons. And that's kind of, oh, what does that mean? Well, can I really control? Yes, believe me, if you will give a donor, a potential donor, an experience that they cannot go out and buy somewhere, they will literally throw money at you because they're looking for something that's going to give them self-worth, a feeling of being involved in something bigger than they are. And especially when you get into the higher income levels, people don't need another boat. They don't need another condo. Buying stuff isn't going to give them what they're looking for. And so if you can give them something that they cannot buy, and that is self-fulfillment, because they're a part of something bigger, then that drives it. And so whether you're texting someone or meeting them on the street or whatever you're doing, that's what facilitates this. But that's hard to do, Simit, because people are so they're doing such great work, and they're so focused on their work, and there's nothing wrong with that. But invite somebody else into that. It's just not all about you.
Right. In fact, typically this is also something that you have mentioned in your book as well, that organizations tend to remember like donor or reach out to the donor only when they need, funds, or they need them to write a check. And once they have done that, a lot of times we fail to kind of acknowledge the support that they have given, or generally just kind of know that what is happening with the donor, in terms of what is their motivation, like what is it that they actually are, looking at when they are supporting an organization. It's not just giving like some money, but there is obviously a backstory to it as to why they are supporting a cause. So, it would be kind of great if you could maybe talk a bit about also what are the typical sort of mistakes that organizations make when it comes to fundraising.
The biggest one is they make it about the money. Number one, and we can talk about that the rest of the hour. But also the whole concept that you mentioned of only being in communication when they're making an ask or they need money. Then that goes back to the problem of making it about money. All right. Because if it's a relationship, you're going to be reaching out to that person to get to know them. And then money becomes a part of it. But it's not what's really causing it to go forward. If every time you saw me, you knew I was going to ask you for money, very soon you'd start to avoid me.
Right,
all right.
absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, if I'm on the street in Mumbai or down there by there he is. I'm going to dash into the cafe, or I'm going to hop into one of those, what do they call it, auto rickshaws, and whiz around the block. I've had that experience. That was kind of fun, actually. If there was someone that was just always wanting to ask a favor of them, which is essentially the same thing, they would avoid them. And nonprofits do that often unwittingly. They're not deliberately doing that, but what they're doing is they're objectifying the person. They see that person as simply a source of revenue or a resource, you see, rather than a person. And therein lies the big difference. So then there's that. And even when someone makes a gift, they've already made a gift. I'll move on to somebody else. That one shot kind of deal, you see. Here's another one too. Principle 4 is learn and plan. You learn who would naturally support you. Not everyone in the world is going to think your cause is really great. And they may be generous people, but for them, it's just not something they're interested in. It doesn't make them any less generous. But often what nonprofits do, they don't take the time to figure out what sort of individual would naturally want to support them, and then focus on reaching out to those people. Too often, there's such we got to raise money today, that they just sort of throw it out there. Or as we would say in America, a shotgun against a barn. It just kind of goes all over. It's all over the map. And whatever sticks kind of thing. Well, a couple of things there are all kinds of things that are wrong with that. But the two practical reasons are, number one, it's very expensive because it brings in very little money. You're spending all your resource on a huge swath of people in the hopes that a small minority will make a gift. Take the time and the effort to be much more focused and targeted in the way you approach people, and you'll raise a lot more money. You'll actually spend less, which means you're raising more.
I mean, this seems like a very elaborate kind of process, and very active process in terms of being really engaged with the donor, and not just just reaching out or just writing generic emails which go out to 5,000 people, and then one of them decides to kind of donate. But what you're suggesting is being kind of more involved. But how can organizations kind of get to that stage? How can they do a more scientific way of profiling someone? How can they go about this process?
It's a combination of what I would call principle 3 and principle 5. First of all, principle 3 is leadership leads. That's your governing board, your executive staff, even no matter how small it is. You see, those presumably are the individuals that are the most committed to your success, or at least they should be. All right, and that isn't always the case, but they should be, because there are 3 roles that your board plays. Number one, it is a board. It's supposed to set your policies. It's a corporate. It's a fiduciary board. It's supposed to advocate for you. And then lastly, they're charged with making sure there are enough resources there to execute the mission. And for most nonprofits, philanthropy is a part of that picture. Maybe not all of it, but it's a part of it. So that you take that responsibility. And then look at principle 5, which is work from the inside out. It's your board should be comprised of all the different constituencies you intend to raise money from. One member. You don't want all bankers or accountants or PR people or doctors or any other group of people. You want a whole group. And then, as I learned in India, as my Indian partner said to me, Larry, in America, one person will talk to 10. Well, in India, one person will talk to 100. And it's true. That's where Indians have a distinct advantage over Americans when it comes to building a network. Because if someone's had a good experience, they'll tell everybody they know, and then some. You want to build on that, because then your network grows. And then in terms of the scientific part of it, you set yourself down in a committee, as a group of people, and you just start looking at, what are the kinds of people that support us? Let's see, where are our gifts coming from? What's important to these people? And then you gradually build a profile of what that typical person might look like. All right. And then that's at that point, if you really want to get sophisticated, and you can, that you begin to employ some of these more sophisticated tools, which use this kind of profiling to begin to, if you're to build your list, you see. Now, it's not all about new donors, though, much more about retaining the ones that you already have. You see, this is a big, big, big mistake that nonprofits make. Oh, we need more donors. Well, no, you need to keep more of the ones you have. Because when you do that, your costs go down and your revenue goes way up, because no one's going to come to you right off the bat and make a huge gift. You know, I've been in this business, 30 years, and I've raised almost $1 billion US. And I can count on one hand the number of times someone walked through the door wherever I was working and offered me a gift that was anywhere close to their financial ability. All right. That just doesn't happen, once in a while. Let me give you a perfect example of this. I live in the Rocky Mountains, and 2 hours from me is a community called Ketchum, and you probably know it as Sun Valley, which is one of the world's top ski resorts in the world. And it's a pretty wealthy community, as you might imagine. And I had a couple of clients up there, and one of them was an arts organization. And they, unfortunately, had been depending way too much on what I call transactional fundraising, specifically a wine auction. All right. And the economy took a real downturn. And, well, how many people are going to buy $2,000 bottles of wine? Not many. All right. Even in that community. So as I was working with them, I said, what you need to do is be focusing on people that are already giving to you. And I said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to come up with a list of everyone that's given you $200 in the last year. Now, and that's not very much, especially in that community. And I want every board member to take 10 of those names, and it wasn't tough, and make a phone call to that person. And all you want to do is, number one, thank them for their gift. And number two, ask them how the organization could support them, not the other way around. Right. And if you get a voicemail, you leave your personal number to return the call. Don't give them the office number. And they did that. Well, there was this one lady who had just moved to Sun Valley from someplace back east, and she wrote him a check for $200. And so they called and thanked her. 2 weeks later to the day, they received in the mail a check for $20,000.
Wow.
And when they called her, she said, well, I was just so impressed when I got this call from the board member that thanked me and wanted to know how I was integrating into the community, that, wow, I want to be a part of this. See, she just wrote a check, $200. Let's just see what happens. And then when she got that, wow, that's what I'm talking about. That's the kind of investment. But you only get that if you're really focused on the donor and not on yourself and on the money.
In fact, today, I just on my LinkedIn, I ran a poll in terms of what is the best way to engage, donors, like how do nonprofits, just to get a sense as to what is it that other nonprofits kind of do in India, as to what are the ways in which they engage with their donors. It's a 1 week long kind of a poll, so I'm hoping to get some interesting insights into this. But what has been your experience?
You don't have enough time to go around to every single donor individually, but technology enables you to do more of that than you used to be able to. But if you have a strong network, you can still do that. I mean, in India, I was told that these networks exist and you can do that. So to give you a perfect example, I usually like to ask someone, well, so Simit, what is it you'd like to accomplish? And just leave that question open. And then listen to what you say to me. Really listen. You see, and then let's see where the conversation goes. And I'll give you a perfect example. I was in Bangalore. When I was in Bangalore in February, they arranged a lot of appointments for me. And one of them, and I won't mention his name because of his business, he's a CEO of a very high-level security company. He provides security for corporate and private people worldwide. We're talking about top level here, okay? Right. When I went into his office, I really thought that James Bond was around the next corner. I mean, that's the kind of environment this was, Right. And this man was very, very sophisticated, but also very cool. You could tell this guy, he had dealt with the best and the worst of the world. But we had a nice conversation. And I said to him, so what would you like to accomplish? He immediately got up. We're in this sequestered, high security, high tech room, and he goes over to this model where he wants to build this training school for vocations. Who would have known that? You
Right.
know, I mean, because I'd been escorted to this off a side street in Bangalore in some armored Range Rover, with all the big muscle around me all the way up to this guy's office. I really felt like I was in a movie set, and this is what he wants to talk about. You see,
Uh,
that's
yeah.
my point. Appearances can be very, very misleading. And if you just give people an opportunity and you're honest about it, they'll respond. They really will. And that's another way of finding the people that are really going to support you too.
I mean, these are wonderful kind of insights and very interesting stories. So when you're dealing with, multiple kinds of donors and multiple people, right? So there are individual donors, there are also, like corporates who are sort of donating to an organization, and there are all kinds of donors. So in terms of when you're fundraising, like, so obviously the strategy to engage each one of them would also be very, very different, right? Do
Yes.
you want to kind of throw some light on that aspect?
Yes, I do. Because often people will say, oh, well, but you can't treat corporations and independent foundations that way. Well, yes, you can with the proviso. First of all, they're people like anyone else,
Right.
but they have organized their fundraising or their philanthropy around particular goals. So it's incumbent upon you, the member of the nonprofit, to figure out what those goals are and how they might really match what you have. Then the next step, and this is something they almost never do, all right, is sure, there's going to be a formal procedure. You fill out a form, you do this, you do that. Okay, fine. But before you do that, you need to make an appointment with the person who's going to receive that and say, Simit, I represent, this orphans home, and I just want 30 minutes of your time because I want to find out what's really interesting you this year for your CSR work. And you'd say, oh, sure, Larry, come on over for 30 minutes. And I wouldn't be asking you for money, but I'd be saying, so what is it that would really entice you? What is it that would really interest you? Okay. And you're going to tell me, right? And if I'm smart, I'm going to go back and I'm going to tailor my proposal the written piece I'll submit to what you said to me. Two things happen. First of all, the fact that I've targeted it so well, it's likely to get more attention. And the second thing is you're going to remember me as a person, not as a piece of paper. And the other thing is, don't try to put a square nail into a round peg. You see, if you're really interested in animal welfare and I'm into orphans, well, we might have a drink together somewhere, but I'm not going to waste your time with a proposal,
Right.
you see? And you're going to respect me for that because sooner or later, one day, you will meet someone that likes what I do. And you're going to say, well, we don't do that, but hey, Larry does. You should go talk to him.
Right.
It's what's the proverbial, what goes around comes around?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, a lot of times, like generally, this is one thing that I have seen, like having worked with donor organizations in India as well. Typically, the kind of interactions that, especially when you go for conferences, for instance, and when you have like your name tag and there is a name of your foundation, for instance, then suddenly you will find a lot of people, trying to talk to you because they are, and it's so transactional and it's so obvious that, people
so
are.
You've got a target on your back, Simit. Here he is. He's over there.
Yeah, you can literally see that people are talking to you because you have like a foundation written on your name kind of tag. And if you hadn't had that, then you would not be having that conversation with that person. The conversations are so directed to just the money part of it, and rather than like a larger conversation which may or may not necessarily lead to raising resources, but at least you are making that connect, you're building your network. And I think that's an important part which organizations typically tend to miss.
Well, and in a conference setting, that is not the place to have a serious discussion about potential funding. Right. It's a place to get to know the person. Because, for instance, you have no idea what that person's going through. Maybe his breakfast didn't agree with him. Maybe he had a fight with his wife that morning. You don't know. You have no idea what's going on in that man's life or that woman's life. And so to treat them as some sort of transactional thing, it's really very devaluing.
like here in India, we see a lot of, debate or like a discussion going around in terms of talking about some of the failures of an organization. And that's something that you have also highlighted in your book as well. But it's a tricky situation, right? Like, how do you talk about failure? Because then the fear is that if you talk a lot about your failures, then, it is likely that you might not get support from your donors, and generally there could be question mark about your capabilities as an organization, and it could just lead to more complication, and you would rather just not talk about it. I mean, what are your thoughts?
Let's go back to a basic motivation of why donors give. Number one, they're giving, see something happen that's going to give them a sense of well-being and fulfillment. Don't ever forget that. All right. So yes, progress is important. However, people who are making gifts, especially at higher levels, they're used to taking risks. They didn't get there playing safe. They respect an intelligent risk taker. Now, that requires the organization to be very transparent, but it also requires them to demonstrate that they are taking some calculated risks. It's all more on the upside than the downside. Here's our goal. And to get there, we're going to take a few risks. And if this doesn't work out, we're going to do this instead. I'll give you a perfect example that people can see. It's an organization called Splash, and it's a charity based out of Seattle in this country that is focused on potable water projects, providing potable water in the third world, probably even some places in India, for all I know. All right. And one thing they've been doing this for 20 years. This isn't anything new for them. They put up a live webcam at every single installation, real time, to show people what's happening at this site. And when a project didn't go well or went belly up or something really happened, well, they would report it. Well, this is what happened. This is how we're going to correct it. This is what we're going to do in the future. You see, it wasn't just, oh, we failed. No. Well, guess what happened? Their giving just kept multiplying. People, oh, I want to be a part of this. Wow, what's going to happen? You see, and people expected it not to be 100% because that's the way it was presented to them. We're risking. We're out there. We're ahead of the pack. And yeah, we're going to make some mistakes and we're going to make some failures, but we're not going to let that stop us. We're going to keep working. So don't be fearful, but be transparent and be honest. And then be prepared to take critique from people. That's the key.
Right. Thank you. I want to also talk a little bit about like the other side of technology, which is the social media part of things. Mm-hmm. Like how can, like now there are so many platforms, like in the US, like in India, we don't have TikTok anymore, but that's not the case in the US, for instance.
Well, I can't wait till it's gone, by the way. we could talk about that. Let's hope it disappears soon. All right.
But here there are like so many platforms right now, right? There's LinkedIn, there's Twitter, there's Instagram, there is and there's Snapchat, and it just kind of keeps on going, and WhatsApp and Telegram and so on. So how can an organization sort of be up to date with what is happening? And in this case, like, should the focus be just on maybe one or two platforms, or should they, like, purely from a fundraising also point of view and from a communications point of view, do you I mean, what has been your experience of having worked with organizations like across the world?
You need to be present where your supporters and potential supporters are. Each one of those platforms that you mentioned to me has a certain profile of the user. The Snapchat are the 20-somethings, all right? Okay. Facebook are the grandmothers, all right? I mean, that's pretty generalized, but still. So once you know the kind of people that would potentially support you, see that requires going back to principle 4 again, that self-reflection. Let's be serious. Let's be frank about the kind of people that would support us. And yes, I would agree. You cannot be all things to all people. You cannot be on all platforms. And there again, let's go back. It's simply a way of communicating. And so you want to be able to communicate with those people who would naturally support you, not the whole world.
Yeah, and there's also the fear of missing out factor, right? The FOMO factor, as they say.
Oh, let me tell you, the tech giants know that. They're in the business to make money. Don't kid yourself. And they have created these algorithms that are truly addictive. Yeah, and so you have to just resist that. I mean, in the bad old days when it was just billboards, you put up billboards in the neighborhoods where you expected to get support from. You didn't plaster them all over town. No, what a waste of money.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. Great. I mean, I have one kind of last sort of final question in terms of course, there is your book, which we will be putting out like in the video as well. But what are the other resources that if you could share, especially for organizations in the social impact space, any resources or websites or where people can learn more about fundraising?
What we're doing in India is we have taken our platform, which is a training platform, to India, and we have a small group of Indians that we call our fellows who are training right now to be coaches to teach others how to do this. And one of the distinctives of what we do is that everything is in plain language. There's no technical terminology or jargon. We've steered clear of that. And we've tried to distill it down to the basics. And we're going to be providing our services in India at a price point that just about anyone can afford. That's very important to me. But I realized early on that what was being counseled didn't require a lot of money to be successful. But unfortunately, getting access to that information was difficult because of the price point. All right. So that there are a lot of what I'd call the tips, techniques, and secrets crowd. Buy a little this, a little that. I would steer clear of that. Steer clear of that. If anyone says 3 steps to whatever, you can just keep looking. So, but we're working hard there, and we're going to be building the platform. If you simply went to our website, the8principles.com, it does geo-target. So you'll see an Indian homepage. And they're going to be in about 2 weeks. You're going to see a lot of changes there because we are rolling out a totally online program, a certification program. And I've talked to a couple of universities there in India that want to use this. And then our fellows group, who are the senior people who we're training. And they come from all levels. They come from a foundation head. There's a couple of entrepreneurs. There's philanthropists. There are all different kinds of people who want to really share this with their countrymen. So the8principles.com. And we're going to make it affordable for people. And it'll be Indians teaching Indians. I think that's very important.
Thank you. I think that will be really helpful for organizations in this space because that's a major, fundraising for a cause. It's like the bread and butter, right? And it's something that organizations struggle to kind of do more effectively. So I think your work will definitely be very, very useful for organizations and for individuals in this space. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you for such a wonderful conversation and for sharing your insights.
I'm just been delighted speaking with you. And Simit, when I come to India, we have to get together.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I need a signed copy. I have the book. I need you to sign it for me, please.
I will when I show up. I'll gladly do it for you. Absolutely, sir.
Looking forward to it, Larry. Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. My pleasure.